My name is Julie Oppermann, and I'm predominantly a painter. I do have some other projects. I did a window installation, and I also am showing a couple of videos, but mostly painting. So my last show at the gallery, I presented a series of moiré paintings using stripes. So it was a lot of lines that were interfering and creating these zigzaggy patterns. And that was a series that I had been working on for maybe 5 years. And about a year ago, I moved away from that. And I realized that you can make moiré patterns with any pattern by overlapping several layers of it, and dots. Dots are perfect for it, actually. In printing, when you print for a newspaper, they print like halftones in a series of dots, and they overlap each layer of color by 45-degree angles. And the reason that they do that is to avoid moiré patterns. I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm overlapping them by really small angles, 5, 10 degrees, to create moiré patterns. So this work is conceptually very closely related to the last series that I showed, even though it looks on the surface very differently, and also the process making it is very different. It's still very involved with color and the experience of vision and the pleasures of sight, but I'm using a really large stencil to do these overlapping dot patterns instead. When you look at them from afar, you might see lines or stars or triangles, and when you get up close, you see tiny dots. And again, it's sort of like print. You think you're looking at the tiny little dots of ink in a halftone, or you think you're looking up close on a screen at pixels. Or sometimes I think that maybe it's related to the way that Seurat was like breaking down images into these series of dots of finite color. So you could then think that these little dots are really tiny pixels to create larger images that maybe look like the other images that I was creating. But actually, I think it's really different from that. It's really the dots themselves that are being magnified into these patterns. This body of work was, at the start, completely different from what I was doing before. And with that, it was very exciting because it was a whole different set of problems that I needed to solve. That's what made it really exciting for me, because I could get completely different images in the end, and I had to think differently about how to create these. And of course, there's just really simple material things, like I didn't know how to stencil, so I had to go on YouTube and watch videos with little grandmothers stenciling flowers. And I think, in a way, they're very related to silk screens, and I had done a few silk screen projects before, so that was really fun. I always get asked how I choose my colors, and I don't think that I really have a system for it, but with this body of work, I wanted to create a bunch of paintings that could hang in the same room and not fight, which sounds much easier said than done. They're very optically overwhelming, and they tend to really fight with one another, so I wanted to tie together very specific hues between a lot of the paintings. They don't all have the same palette, but they all have maybe the same blue or the same yellow. There's always some overlap between them, and there's not a certain palette that goes all the way through. Another thing that guides me when I'm selecting my colors is that given the number of layers of dots that I'm overlapping, I want them to each be very different. Like, it works really well if I pick 3 colors that are sort of equidistant on a color wheel. So that means that the hues are going to be different enough, or the values are going to be different enough, or the saturations would be different enough. So I play with those things, and it tends to work really well if I pick some sort of version of primary colors, like a red, a yellow, and a blue, or I can push the yellow to be more orange, or the blue to be more green. And with all of these, I ended the painting with a layer of black dots, which it adds another layer of interference. It darkens the darks, but it also adds contrast so that the yellow then becomes almost radiance and neon. And so I did want these paintings to be very colorful and to reflect the sunshine and the light. I find color to be very pleasurable to look at. I've always really I get a lot of fun playing with color, and so I wanted these to embody that, embrace that. What's really cool is that all of these paintings were created using a single stencil. I just have one large stencil, and I've used it in every single painting with maybe 3 or 4 different layers. And if you walk around the room, every single painting has a different pattern, has a different interference effect, has a different feeling. One thing that really surprised me and was exciting making these works was I was sitting on Photoshop and playing around with my little layers, and somehow with the last layer of black dots over the blue dots, I just did a vertical shift, and basically the 2 layers were aligned perfectly, but I moved it up so that the dots were overlapping, creating these lines. Like the black dot and the teal dot are completely in line, making tiny little stripes across this painting, which you may not even notice looking at it, but the effect of that is to create these huge vertical stripes going the other direction. I mean, I didn't even know that was possible. And at first, when it happened, I couldn't figure out why. And then once I figured that out, I got really excited to make a whole series of stripe paintings, because I thought I was making stripe paintings before, now I'm doing dots, and now suddenly I'm making stripes out of dots. It's like, it's beautiful, I've come full circle. And so I'm really excited about working with that more in the future, and these stripes can become bands and can become gradients, and I can expand their size and how many you see within a certain frame. In the future, I'll probably also be looking at other types of stencils, other patterns, and other materials to bring into it to expand my vocabulary.
My name is Jean Shin, and my medium ranges from sculpture, drawing, photography. It really starts from a concept and sight, usually, and expands from there. The imagery for this project starts with my thinking about the relationships that build in the home. So the flatware comes directly from an object that we're all familiar with, especially around the dinner table, and the notion of being able to sit and having substance like food. And yet we don't really need flatware necessarily to have that, and certainly the whole set. And so I was thinking about what that brings to mind as how the gatherings of family meals, and then extended ideas of the social connections one might have at a dinner party, you know, extending that family metaphor. So it's really about thinking about those kinds of traditions of the home and the rituals. And the other imagery, of course, is the tree, and I'm thinking about nature and how we coexist in nature, and how that relationship between what we think is a domestic space inside the home is actually a reflection of how we cultivate the nature around us, you know, and in some way that we're part of nature and nature is part of us, you know. So the tree is something I've been thinking in terms of how have it all around us as a sense of beauty, but also in these pieces that I created, it's called Grafted Settings. And I was thinking about how one grafts another tree, another generation, replicates this process, you know. And so we have a large tree here, and then to imagine the next one, or did it go from this generation to a growth process? In the same way as when we think about families, it's really about generations passing on a legacy, or the other way around when you're thinking about your children growing older. So I feel like that conversation connects us to this living tree, just as these flatwares are just shifting and moving and feeling very organic as if they're growing. Most of my work deals with a new project, and so I'm generating new ideas, I'm generating new materials and new sources of ways of transforming those materials to resonate sometimes with the community, even just in the process. So, it's really incredibly exciting because every single time there's a shift, and rethinking of my entire practice and what I want to make and what I want to be thinking about for, a year or 2 years. But at the same time, it means I'm really in a new place. I don't know how to work with these materials. They're really extremely challenging. By the time I think of the idea and I get the material, they may not perform the way. So I have to follow the material leads. And then to be able to either work with it myself, what I imagined would happen, and to find the right fabricator who could also literally transform it with me, and have that kind of dialogue of collaboration. Most of my work is incredibly labor intensive. And so there's a real investment both from my lead, the kind of time that I spend to craft it, but also translating that craft to someone else who could take that on. And it's a really incredibly amazing gift in some way for people to see how the hand is still in the work, and it will always be in the work. So here we are today to kind of witness many hands, from the people who gave me the fork, or the spoon that was in their life, and they went through a sort of a selection process. So it's like a participatory level of, like, does this map my history, my identity, and there's traces of that in every single piece. And then as I choose to include it in the project as well, there's this kind of transfer and exchange that I'm having with the prior owner to the eventual presentation and exhibition. And then as these live in other people's homes and museums, it again gets rooted and transferred over to a new site, a new community. So that's the kind of exciting part. You start somewhere and it's filled with so much work, and yet that work also means this incredible gift of exchanges to its final arrival. Well, this project has sustained me for a couple of years, so I'm really excited to see this iteration. And now that I've started, it's like a tree that grows. It keeps repopulating. I want to make more saplings and make more branches and turn them to trees. The whole grafting idea of production means that they can regenerate and continue. Like, I would love a forest full of them, And sadly, to think about our consequences in ecology as we look around our environment, deforesting. Nature's resilience on this, and trees fall, trees age, trees die out. So I'm keeping that in mind. I feel like it's both caring for them to make sure that they arrive somewhere wonderful, and that is part of sharing that idea with someone, but also to know that, like, a part of this can extend to making new works, What's nice is I may start with a gem of an idea, about envisioning the silverware, tree. But once I arrive at the sculpture, looking at it again and again over the years, there's always some other kind of way to tap into that work, and the photographs happened after I produced the sculpture, and they were just documentation at first, but then they caught something that the actual viewing of the work doesn't, and then the rubbings came as another iteration of taking one a template of the sculpture and using it as the generative, and to make that physically manifest in a drawing, in the oldest way possible, like footage, to rub and get charcoal over a surface and feel the physical contours, And I was saying how that also reactivates memories for me about using flatware in people's lives, like kind of polishing ritual, where it's the same object in one's life that you remember, but once it's aged, and then you bring out something, and each time you see that design or the kind of physical form, it comes alive. And I feel like the rubbing kind of does that. It's a ritual that I've sort of enjoyed doing, and again, another iteration I couldn't imagine when I started. So I imagine there'll be some other form soon as I keep working on this project.